My name is Harvey Emerson. I'm 81 years old, a retired history teacher, and a widower of 10 years. I live alone in the same modest 2-story brick house on the edge of Lexington, Kentucky, where my late wife Miriam and I raised our daughter and spent over 4 decades together. The neighborhood has changed, like everything else, becoming quieter, less familiar, lonelier. Most of my old friends have passed on or moved away. The ones who remain are either in assisted living facilities or locked inside their homes by failing bodies and television screens that blur the passage of time. My house is tidy, too quiet, filled with the scent of old books and floor polish. I keep things clean, not out of pride, but to maintain a sense of order that my life no longer gives me. Every morning starts the same. I wake up at 6:30, not because I have anywhere to be, but because my body no longer allows deep sleep. I make oatmeal, sit by the kitchen window, and watch the squirrels dart between the trees in the backyard. It's the same routine Miriam and I shared for years. Only now her chair sits empty, and the silence sometimes feels like it's pressing against my chest. I still speak to her, sometimes out loud, sometimes only in thought. I ask her if I'm doing the right thing, if she'd be proud of how I've handled everything, of how I've tried to stay connected to our family. I tell her I miss her, because I do, more than I thought humanly possible. My daughter Marcy lives 20 minutes away, in one of those new developments where the houses all look the same and the sidewalks are too clean. She's in insurance, something I've never quite understood, though I pretended to for years. Her son, Carter, my only grandchild, just turned 20. He's in college now, studying communications or marketing or something like that. We don't talk much. When he was little, we were close. I taught him to ride a bike. I helped him build a model of Gettysburg for his 6th grade project. He used to call me Grandpa the Brave because of my stories about the Korean War, even though I never saw combat, only logistics. That title meant everything to me. But as he grew older, Carter changed. Or maybe the world around him did. The warm, curious boy I once knew became withdrawn, impatient, and then worse, indifferent. Now when he visits, he spends most of the time scrolling through his phone, speaking in sighs and single-syllable words. I've learned not to ask too many questions. The last time I did, Marcy told me I was pushing him too hard. So I sit quietly, offering him snacks, asking about his classes, pretending not to notice when he doesn't answer. He hasn't visited in nearly 2 months now. He says he's too busy. College, girlfriend, work, study, job. I nod and say I understand, though of course I don't. Marcy calls once a week, usually on Sunday afternoons. The calls last 5, maybe 10 minutes. She asks how I'm feeling, if I've taken my pills, if the bills are paid. She always sounds rushed, like she's doing it out of obligation. I tell her I'm fine, always fine, even when I'm not. I don't want to be a burden. I've become skilled at swallowing loneliness like medicine. My health is decent, all things considered. A little arthritis in the hands, a bad hip from an old ladder fall, but nothing catastrophic. I still drive, though only during the day and only short distances. The neighbors' kids used to stop by and mow the lawn for me. That stopped when their parents moved away. Now I do it myself, slowly, carefully, like everything else. It takes me 3 hours what used to take 1, but there's a certain pride in doing it alone. My finances are stable. Miriam and I were careful. We never spent more than we earned, never bought anything on credit if we couldn't pay it off immediately. I've got a pension, some savings, and the house is long paid off. I've offered help to Marcy more than once, down payment on their 2nd car, tuition support for Carter's 1st year, but she always insists she'll manage. Still, I know she struggles. She drops hints in conversations. Medical bills, rising tuition, Carter needing a better laptop. I usually respond by writing checks quietly and mailing them without a word. It feels transactional now, like I'm paying rent for their attention. I suppose what hurts the most is the quiet erosion. There was no great argument, no dramatic falling out, just a gradual distancing, like water wearing away at stone. One visit missed, then another. Calls grew shorter. Holidays became optional. Birthdays forgotten. It's the slow abandonment that guts you, not because it's sudden, but because it makes you question if the closeness was ever real. I try not to blame them. I know times are different. People are busier. Values have changed. But still, I can't shake the feeling that I was once someone to them, and now I'm just someone they tolerate. A placeholder. A fading photograph. Last Christmas, Carter came over for 20 minutes. He gave me a pair of socks, bright neon things with pineapples on them. "Funny, right?" he said. I smiled and thanked him. I wore them even though they were absurd. He took a picture for Instagram. "With the OG, chillin'," he captioned it. I saw the post later. It got 26 likes. I wondered how many of them knew who I was or cared. Sometimes I look out the window and wonder what it would feel like to be needed again. Not for money or convenience, but truly needed. Missed. Cherished. I imagine Carter as a boy again, running through the yard with a plastic sword, pretending to slay dragons. Back then, he believed I was invincible. I believed it too. Now, most days I feel invisible. I suppose that's the worst part of aging. Not the aches, not the forgetting, not the quiet. It's the invisibility. The sense that you've become part of the wallpaper in other people's lives. Always there, never noticed, until the day you're not. I try to fill my time. I read. I go to the library. I volunteer once a week at the local elementary school, reading to kids who barely know what a record player is. They smile when I talk about the old days, though I can tell most of them think I'm just a relic. Still, it feels good to be listened to, even for a little while. What I want, what I long for, is not admiration or gratitude, just recognition, a sign that I mattered, that the things I taught, the love I gave, the sacrifices I made, they weren't forgotten. That somewhere in Carter's heart, I'm still Grandpa the Brave. But life, I've learned, doesn't always reward patience or goodness. Sometimes it kicks you when you're already down, just to see if you'll get back up. I didn't expect betrayal. I didn't expect cruelty. I thought I had seen all that life could throw at me. I was wrong. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, the kind that used to mean something when Miriam was alive. We'd have lunch on the patio, talk about nothing in particular, then maybe go for a walk through the park if the weather was kind. But now, Saturdays were just another quiet day on the calendar, another reminder that time didn't stop for memory. I was finishing my usual soup, chicken and rice, nothing fancy, when the doorbell rang. That, in itself, was surprising. No one rang anymore. Most people texted or just didn't bother coming. I opened the door and saw Carter standing there, one hand on his phone, the other holding a duffel bag. Beside him was a young woman I didn't recognize, perhaps 19 or 20, stylish in a careless kind of way. Long blonde hair, tight jeans, chewing gum like she didn't know she was on someone's doorstep. "Hey, Grandpa," Carter said, not looking up from his phone. "This is Bree. Say hi, Bree." The girl gave a lazy wave without making eye contact. "We're heading out of town for the weekend. Can you keep an eye on her?" I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He finally looked up, annoyance flickering in his eyes as if I'd asked something stupid. "Bree's folks kicked her out for a bit. Long story. She just needs a place to crash while I'm at this retreat thing in Asheville. You know, the mentorship event I told you about?" He hadn't told me anything. "So she'll be here just for 2 nights, tops. She's chill. You won't even notice her." Before I could say anything, Bree stepped past me into the house, dropped her bag in the hallway, and made a beeline for the living room, already tapping through apps on her phone. "Carter," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "Don't you think this is something we should have talked about first? I'm not comfortable having a stranger in my home without any warning." He sighed dramatically, as if I'd just ruined his day. "God, Grandpa, she's not a stranger. She's with me. It's not a big deal. You're just babysitting, basically. I mean, what else do you have going on?" The words hit me like a slap. Just babysitting. What else do I have going on? I stared at him. At this young man I once taught to tie his shoes, who used to ask me to read him stories at bedtime, who once told his entire first-grade class that his grandpa was a war hero. "Carter," I said slowly, trying to choose my words carefully. "This isn't about having something going on. It's about respect. You didn't even ask. You just showed up and assumed." He rolled his eyes. "It's for 2 nights. You always say how quiet the house is. Now you won't be alone. Think of it as company." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not physical pain, but something colder. He didn't understand? Worse, he didn't want to understand. He was already backing away, heading down the porch steps. "I'll check in tomorrow. She's got my number if anything comes up. Thanks, Grandpa. You're the best." And with that, he was gone. The car engine revving in the driveway, music thumping as he drove away like nothing unusual had happened. I stood in the doorway for a long time, unsure what to do. Bree was already on the couch, feet up, shoes still on, a can of soda from my fridge in her hand. I thought about saying something, about asking her to treat the house with some courtesy, but I stopped myself. What would it change? She wasn't the problem. She was just the symptom. I went back to the kitchen and sat down, my half-eaten soup now cold, appetite gone. That evening, Bree barely acknowledged me. She ordered food from her phone, didn't offer to share, and when I mentioned that the Wi-Fi could be a bit slow, she said, "Ugh, yeah, no kidding," and went back to scrolling. At around 10, she asked if she could smoke on the porch. I said no, that I didn't allow smoking on the property. She gave me a look like I'd told her to dig her own grave. "Whatever," she muttered, grabbing her bag and disappearing upstairs into the guest room. I heard her on the phone for the next hour, giggling and swearing loudly. I shut my bedroom door, but it didn't help. I lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the old house, as if it too was trying to make sense of what had just happened. I kept replaying Carter's words in my head. "You're just babysitting," like I was some paid caretaker, like my presence had no value beyond convenience. I thought of all the times I'd driven him to school, stayed up with him when he had a fever, paid for his summer camps, bought him books because he said he wanted to be smart like Grandpa. All of it, shrunk down to a weekend favor. The next morning, Bree was already gone when I came down for breakfast. No note, no text, no mention of where she'd gone. Her duffel bag was still by the couch, so I assumed she planned to return. Around noon, Marcy called, not to ask how I was, but to check if Carter had dropped off Bree. She said she might stop by. I lied. "Oh, good," Marcy said, sounding distracted. "Carter's been so busy lately, I barely see him. It's nice she has someone like you around. You've always been the dependable one." That word, dependable, landed with the same dull ache as babysitter. I was a utility, a fixture, reliable like plumbing, taken for granted until it breaks. When Bree finally returned late that afternoon, she came in with takeout again, didn't say a word, and disappeared upstairs. I thought about confronting her, about calling Carter and telling him to come get her, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to deal with the confrontation. Maybe because I didn't want to hear Carter tell me I was overreacting. Or maybe, and this is the part that hurt most, I didn't want to push them away even more than they already were. Sunday evening, Carter came to pick her up. He didn't come inside. Bree stepped out without a thank you, without a goodbye. Carter sat in the car, engine running, and waved from the driver's seat. "Thanks again, Grandpa. You're a lifesaver." I didn't wave back. I closed the door and stood in the hallway, the quiet swallowing the space they'd left behind. I went into the living room and looked at the spot on the couch where Bree had sat. A faint outline of her body still lingered in the cushions, an indentation like a bruise. I walked over, sat down, and tried to imagine Miriam in her chair across from me. What would she say? What would she do? She always believed the best in people, especially family. "They're just young," she would say. "They don't understand yet. They will." But I wasn't so sure anymore. That night, I took out the old family albums, the ones with Carter's baby pictures, drawings he made in kindergarten, a crayon scribbled, "I love you, Grandpa," in shaky handwriting. I turned the pages slowly, and with each turn, I felt something inside me fracture. Not because I missed the past, but because I was beginning to suspect it wasn't coming back. I wasn't just being left behind. I was being erased, quietly, without ceremony. I closed the album, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a long time. Something had shifted. A line had been crossed. They didn't see it. But I did. And I wouldn't forget. The weeks that followed passed in a strange kind of haze. Days marked by silence, interrupted only by the mechanical hum of the refrigerator, the slow ticking of the kitchen clock, and the occasional phone call from Marcy that always began with a sigh, and ended with a promise to catch up properly soon. I tried to shake the feeling of what had happened with Carter and Bree, to chalk it up to youthful carelessness or misjudgment, but the words he'd said, "You're just babysitting," kept echoing in my mind like an insult carved into the walls of the house itself. Every room felt a little colder, a little more empty, like some essential part of my dignity had been quietly carried out with Bree's duffel bag. I busied myself with yard work, cleaning, rereading old books that had once stirred my imagination, but now just filled the silence. But inside, something had shifted, something I couldn't quite name, a slow uncoiling of disappointment that reached deeper than I wanted to admit. It wasn't long after that Marcy called again, not to apologize or even mention what had happened, but to ask if I could help out a little. Carter, she explained, had some unexpected expenses with school, something about needing new software for a class, and his laptop was acting up, and maybe I could just send a little money to tide them over. I asked how much, and she hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Maybe 1,000? If that's okay? I said I'd think about it. There was silence on the line, followed by her saying she was a little surprised by my tone. "You've always helped before, Dad." And it was true. I had. Time and again. Even after Miriam died, when the calls became less frequent and the visits almost non-existent, I kept sending checks. Birthdays, holidays, tuition help, car repairs. Carter's first semester, every time they needed something, I gave it. Because that's what family does. Because that's what a father does. But this time, I told her I needed to look over my budget. I hung up and sat in the living room, the silence heavier than usual. Something inside me felt hollowed out, like I'd been mined for parts. A few days later, Carter called. Not to check on me, not to apologize, but to follow up about the money. His voice was bright, casual, impatient. He mentioned his girlfriend had started a YouTube channel, and they were thinking of doing some brand stuff together. It could really take off, he said, as if that was the justification for needing help. When I asked if this was related to school, he laughed. Grandpa, you're so old school. It's all about entrepreneurship now. We're building something. It's just that we're short this month. I asked him what had happened to the money I sent last fall. He dodged the question. I asked about his grades. He muttered something about switching majors. I'm figuring it out. It's all good, he said, as if that closed the matter. When I paused, he sighed. Look, if it's too much for you, just say so. I get it. You're on a fixed income or whatever. The way he said it, dismissive, vaguely mocking, cut deeper than he realized. I told him I'd send $500, no more. He sounded disappointed, but accepted it. Thanks, Grandpa, you're solid. And then he hung up. I went to the bank the next day, made the transfer, and asked the teller to print out a full account history. When I got home and looked through it, I was shocked by just how much I'd given them in the past 5 years. Quiet transfers, quiet gifts, quiet withdrawals. It added up to over $28,000. Not all at once, never enough to raise alarms, but steady, relentless. And for what? No thank you notes, no visits, no warmth, just expectations. It began to dawn on me that they weren't asking for help. They were budgeting around my reliability. I wasn't family. I was a financial backstop, a quiet resource, an ATM with a heartbeat. I didn't say anything to them at first. What would I even say? That I felt used? That I was hurt? They'd call me dramatic, sensitive, out of touch. So instead, I kept things cordial, distant. But I stopped offering, and I started noticing things, like the fact that Carter never once called me just to talk, only to request. Like how Marcy's voice turned brittle the moment I hesitated to say yes. Like how neither of them ever asked if I needed anything. Groceries, help with the gutters, a ride to the doctor. I was alone, and they liked it that way. It gave them freedom. Freedom from responsibility. Freedom from guilt. Then came the final nudge. I was at the pharmacy picking up my prescriptions when the cashier mentioned that someone had tried to use my loyalty card earlier that week. Your grandson, I think? She said. He said he was picking up for you, but the name didn't match. My stomach tightened. Carter hadn't mentioned anything about running errands. I called Marcy that evening and asked if Carter had needed something at the pharmacy. There was a pause, and then she said, Oh, that. He just needed to grab some protein powder. He thought maybe your card would help with the discount. It's no big deal. I told her it was dishonest. She scoffed. You're overreacting. He's a good kid. You're just not used to how things work these days. I didn't respond, because I realized then, painfully, that she genuinely believed that. That Carter taking what wasn't his, lying about it, using my identity for a discount. None of it was a red flag to her. It was just what young people did now. Just life. That night, I pulled out an old envelope where I'd stored my will, power of attorney forms, and the deed to the house. I hadn't looked at it in years. Miriam and I had drawn up everything together, back when Carter was still in grade school and Marcy still called 3 times a week. Back then, it made sense to leave everything to them, to assume love and loyalty would carry forward. But now I wasn't so sure. I looked at the documents and felt a gnawing sense of unease. I realized I didn't know who I was to them anymore. Benefactor? Obstacle? Obligation? I put the envelope back in the drawer, but I didn't close it. Something had changed, and once it changes, you can't go back. You can only go forward, or burn the bridge behind you. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the letter arrived. Thin, plain, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize at first. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through the mail like I did every day, careful to separate bills from advertisements and junk. When I saw the envelope, my heart sank a little. It was from the bank's legal department, a place I'd hoped never to hear from. Inside, The letter detailed something that felt like a punch in the gut. There had been a request submitted by Carter to gain access to my accounts. The letter claimed that I had authorized his involvement, that he was acting on my behalf. It was signed by a lawyer I didn't know, and it was dated 2 weeks earlier. I read it again and again, disbelief growing into a cold, sharp anger. I hadn't given Carter permission to do anything with my finances. Not a single thing. In fact, I'd told him the opposite. My money was my security, something I'd worked a lifetime to build. Now, it seemed, he was moving to take control quietly, behind my back. I called Marcy immediately, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and frustration. She didn't deny it. Instead, she said it was for my own good, that Carter was just trying to help manage things, that I should trust him a little. Trust him? After what? After all the times he dismissed me, ignored my calls, treated me like a convenience? I told her that wasn't trust. It was betrayal. The line went silent for a long time before she finally said, "Maybe you're just not seeing the bigger picture." That phrase haunted me, like some cruel joke. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls with bank managers, lawyers, and legal advisors. I learned that Carter had already withdrawn money, made purchases, and attempted transfers, all using documents I supposedly signed. I felt violated, like someone had taken a knife to the years I'd spent building a life and sliced away my security. My own flesh and blood was treating me like a resource to be tapped and discarded. The shock of that revelation pushed me into a place I hadn't visited in years, a mix of paranoia and defiance. I found myself pacing late at night, trying to make sense of it all. How could they think this was acceptable? How could they believe I would willingly hand over control of my life and legacy? I thought of Miriam, how she would have reacted, probably with tears and quiet rage, urging me to stand firm, to fight for what was mine. I felt suddenly more alone than ever. But something else happened. Beneath the anger, a flicker of clarity grew. I began to realize that this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about recognition, about being seen as a person and not just an obstacle or an ATM. It was about taking back control of the narrative of my own life. I wasn't going to let them erase me quietly. With the help of a trusted attorney, I began the slow, complicated process of challenging the legitimacy of Carter's actions. I submitted affidavits, medical evaluations, and proof that I had never authorized any of the financial moves attributed to me. The bank froze the accounts temporarily, but Carter and Marcy fought back, claiming I was suffering from dementia, that I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. They presented documents that I knew nothing about, medical assessments that painted me as confused, forgetful, vulnerable. That accusation stung as deeply as the theft. I was not a frail old man lost to time. I was Harvey Emerson, a man who had taught thousands of students, loved his family fiercely, and faced life's challenges head-on. I refused to be reduced to a stereotype, to have my mind doubted because of my age. I agreed to undergo independent evaluations, prepared for every test with determination. The doctors I saw listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and after a series of assessments, declared me mentally competent. I felt a quiet triumph in that verdict, but I also felt the bitter weight of what had been done to get me there. This was no longer just a family disagreement. It was a battle for dignity, for justice, for the truth. And I was fighting alone. At times, the loneliness overwhelmed me. I would sit in my living room, staring at photographs of Miriam and Carter as a child, wondering when the warmth had turned cold. I thought about the promises made in happier days, the trust that had been broken, and the path that lay ahead. I had to be careful. They were crafty, willing to manipulate documents, doctors, and emotions to get what they wanted. but I was determined not to give up. The ordeal also opened my eyes to the fragility of family ties, especially when money is involved. I realized that love is sometimes conditional, that loyalty can be bought and sold, and that the people closest to you can be the ones who hurt you most. It was a painful truth, but it steeled my resolve. I would not be cast aside. I would reclaim what was mine, not just for myself, but to honor the life Miriam and I had built, and to protect whatever legacy I could leave behind. In the quiet moments between court hearings and doctor's appointments, I began to plan. I reached out to old friends, neighbors, and community members, rebuilding the support network that had slowly eroded. I contacted charities and institutions that had once been dear to Miriam and me. I started drafting letters, outlining my wishes for the future in a way that no one could challenge. The letter from the bank had been the catalyst I needed, not just to fight back financially, but to fight back emotionally and morally. I was no longer willing to be invisible, no longer willing to accept the role they had cast me in. This was my life, my story, and I would write its next chapters with strength, dignity, and, if necessary, justice. As the legal battles dragged on, I found solace in small victories, a supportive word from a lawyer, a kind gesture from a neighbor, a phone call from someone who remembered me as more than just a name on a check. These moments reminded me that I was not alone, that I was still a man of value and meaning. And in the depths of my heart, I held on to the hope that one day Carter and Marcy would understand that family isn't just about inheritance or convenience, but about respect, love, and the ties that bind us beyond money and selfishness. Until then, I would stand firm. The turning point came not in the form of some dramatic outburst or legal ruling, but quietly, as many of the most decisive events in my life have, through a detail buried in paperwork I had nearly forgotten existed. It was late one evening, and I was sitting at the dining table with a cup of black coffee I'd brewed too strong, flipping through a drawer I hadn't touched in years. There, among Miriam's old birthday cards and expired coupons, I found a folder labeled Maplewood. At first, I didn't recognize it, but when I opened it and saw the copies of the deed, the mortgage agreement, and a highlighted phrase reading, "Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship," my heart froze. I remembered the day Marcy and Carter asked me for help with the down payment on their new house. They said it was just a formality, that being listed as a co-borrower would help them secure better rates. I had agreed, trusting, perhaps naively, that it meant little more than helping family. I had barely read the documents, but now, here it was in writing, legally binding proof that I wasn't just a co-signer. I was a co-owner. I owned a third of that house. The realization sent a tremor through me. For years they had spoken about their home, their kitchen, their plans for renovation, their future. They had never invited me over after the first month, never acknowledged me as anything but the man who wrote the check. Yet by every legal definition, I was as much a part of that house as they were. And suddenly, the pattern of the past few months, the distancing, the manipulation, the attempt to assume control over my finances, clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They had planned to push me out, not just from their lives, but from everything I had built. The abandoned calls, the forged documents, the planted rumors of mental decline. It was a coordinated effort to strip me of identity, agency, and security. I could feel it in my bones, and now I had proof. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the documents spread across the coffee table like a battlefield map, thinking not just of what they had done, but why. Was it resentment? Entitlement? Did Carter believe that being born into the family gave him the right to take whatever he wanted? Did Marcy truly see me as an obstacle to be removed? Or was it all colder than that? Simple opportunism, the kind born when affection runs dry and greed takes root. I thought back to Carter's childhood, to his drawings and hugs, and the way he used to run to me at the gate. Was it all real then? If so, how had we come to this? The next day I made an appointment with Martin Langley, an old colleague of mine who had become a real estate lawyer. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I called and explained the situation, his voice sharpened with interest. I brought him the documents, and he confirmed what I suspected. As a one-third owner, I had the right to sell my portion, to force a sale of the property, even to initiate proceedings if the other parties refused to cooperate. "They can't just erase you," he said, his tone firm. "They'd have to go through you, or the courts." It was the first time in weeks I'd felt something close to power. I asked what the next step was. "First," he said, "we notify them, formally. No more phone calls or assumptions. We draft a letter of intent to sell your share and request either a buyout or joint sale. They'll have 30 days to respond." I nodded, heart pounding with something between dread and resolve. While Martin prepared the documents, I contacted Veronica Page, a local real estate agent who came highly recommended. She met me at the house while Marcy and Carter were away, still apparently traveling, though they hadn't told me where. The house stood empty, silent behind its carefully trimmed hedges and clean walkway. Veronica walked the perimeter with a practiced eye, taking notes, snapping photos, murmuring market figures under her breath. "With this neighborhood and condition," she said, "you're looking at maybe $700,000 total, so your share would be about $233,000, maybe more if we negotiate well." The number wasn't what stunned me. It was the idea of taking something back, of reclaiming a piece of my life that had been taken for granted for too long. I mailed the notice of intent the same day. Registered post, signature required. I imagined their faces when they opened it, Carter's smirk twisting into confusion, Marcy's calm unraveling into panic. I didn't enjoy the thought, not exactly. But I couldn't deny the sense of justice it brought. The reply came a week later, not from them directly, but from a lawyer representing both. His tone was sharp, defensive. He claimed I was confused about my role in the ownership, that I had never expressed interest in the property, and that my recent behavior raised serious concerns about capacity. The implication was clear. They were trying to paint me as mentally unfit again. They were going to fight. But I was ready now. We responded with medical documents from 3 separate specialists who had assessed me in the previous month, none of whom found evidence of dementia, cognitive decline, or incapacity. I included a letter from my longtime physician, who testified to my mental clarity and independent living. We attached the deed, highlighted the clauses. The message was simple. I was lucid, I was a legal owner, and I was not going away. That same week, I received a phone call from Marcy. It was the first time she'd called in nearly a month. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Dad, we got your letter. What's going on?" I asked her to speak with her lawyer. She ignored that. "You're overreacting. This isn't necessary. We can figure this out as a family." The word family caught in my throat like a bone. "Now we're a family?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. After months of silence, after unauthorized access to my finances, after lies about my health? She went quiet. Then, in a lower voice, said, "We were worried about you. That's all. We thought maybe you needed help." I almost laughed. Help is when you ask someone how they're doing. Help is bringing groceries, not stealing access to their bank account. You don't get to call this help, Marcy. She didn't reply. The sale proceedings advanced. Veronica found a serious buyer within 2 weeks, an older couple looking to downsize from a larger estate. They made a strong offer, $715,000, contingent on a clean title. That meant Marcy and Carter would have to agree to sell or face legal pressure. When they still refused to respond formally, Martin filed a petition in family court requesting a petition by sale, a process that would legally force the sale of the home and divide the proceeds. The court set a hearing date for the following month. During that time, Carter finally reached out, not by phone, but by showing up unannounced on my porch. He looked thinner than I remembered, pale and twitchy, dressed in expensive streetwear that reeked of effort. "Can we talk?" he said, avoiding eye contact. I let him in. We sat in silence for a while. He made small talk, asked about the weather, mentioned some business he was trying to get off the ground. I waited. Eventually, he said, "I didn't mean to push things so far. We just thought maybe it was time." "Time for what?" I asked. "To put me in a home? Take my money? Erase me from the deed I paid into?" He flushed red. "No, not like that. We just thought it'd be easier for everyone if I stopped being your problem." I finished. He didn't deny it. I nodded. "Well, it's not going to be easier. Not anymore." He stood, agitated. "You're going to destroy everything. We worked so hard on that house. Mom's devastated." I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time, not as the boy I helped raise, but as the man he had become. Entitled, unaccountable. Someone who mistook kindness for weakness and silence for permission. "You destroyed it, Carter," I said, my voice steady. "When you started treating me like an obstacle instead of a grandfather." He left without saying goodbye. The day of the court hearing arrived with little fanfare. I didn't attend. Martin handled everything. Later that afternoon, he called to tell me the judge had ruled in our favor. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided by law. Marcy and Carter had 30 days to vacate. If they refused, the sheriff would be notified. There were no more appeals left. That night, I opened a bottle of wine that Miriam and I had been saving for a special occasion. I drank a glass alone in the living room, the quiet no longer oppressive but peaceful. I had fought, not for revenge, but for recognition, for memory, for dignity. They had underestimated me. They had thought I was too old, too soft, too forgetful to resist. But I remembered everything, and I wasn't done yet. The moment I had prepared for, waited for, and silently feared, arrived not with a letter or a call, but with the rumble of a car engine pulling up outside my new apartment. I was sitting by the window, sipping my afternoon tea and reading the same page of a novel for the third time, when I heard the tires crunch on gravel and the sudden silence that followed. I looked up and recognized the car immediately, a sleek black SUV, newer than the one Carter used to drive, its shine out of place against the muted palette of our modest complex. The doors opened in quick succession. Marcy stepped out first, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her posture rigid with tension, her every movement sharp and purposeful. Carter followed, slower, shoulders hunched, hands buried in his jacket pockets. They didn't look around or admire the small pond that glistened a few feet from the entrance, didn't greet the older couple watering their potted plants. They came with a singular purpose, their expressions carved in granite, as if rehearsing the confrontation all the way there. I met them at the door before they could knock. "You shouldn't have come," I said quietly, stepping outside, not wanting this scene to unfold in my living room where the air still smelled of peace. Marcy took off her sunglasses, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "We need to talk, Dad," she said, voice tight. "There's nothing left to talk about," I answered. "You got the court ruling. The house is being sold. I've disengaged from your accounts. You received your shares. What more is there?" "You blindsided us," Carter muttered, looking away. You made us look like fools. You did that to yourselves, I replied. All I did was stop playing the role you assigned me. They followed me to the small bench near the edge of the courtyard. We sat, not speaking for a long moment. Finally, Marcy inhaled deeply. We weren't trying to hurt you. We thought we were helping you. By filing fraudulent medical papers? By trying to transfer my money without my consent? By bringing strangers into my home and telling me I was just babysitting? That's help. She shook her head, her voice cracking. You don't understand how hard things have been. The bills, the college loans, the pressure. Carter's future is not more valuable than my present. I interrupted. You don't get to trade my dignity for his convenience. Carter leaned forward, his tone suddenly sharp. You could have come to us. We're family. You didn't have to go nuclear, selling the house, draining the account. What are we supposed to do now? I turned to him slowly, my gaze unwavering. You're supposed to live your life with the same independence you expected from me. That house was never just yours. That money wasn't a birthright. You looked at me and saw a resource, a relic. But I am still alive, still thinking, still remembering everything you chose to forget. Marcy's voice softened then, laced with desperation. Don't you miss us? Don't you want to see Carter graduate, get married, have kids? You're cutting yourself off. I've been cut off for years, I said. This isn't new. It's just official now. She bit her lip, and for a moment, the woman I remembered, the teenager who cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak, the young mother who let me hold Carter before the nurses, surfaced in her eyes. But it passed. You taught me to work hard, she said, to never ask for more than I earned. But we thought we earned this. All the years we were close, all the time we shared. You earned love, I said, and you had it. You threw it away when it no longer served you. I didn't stop loving you. You stopped seeing me. They sat in silence after that. I knew they wanted something more, an opening, an opportunity to undo what had been done. But I had nothing left to give. Not my money, not my forgiveness. Not yet. We should go, Carter mumbled, rising first. This was pointless. Marcy stood too, slower, brushing invisible dust from her coat. You're really okay with this? With being alone? I looked at the pond, the ducks gliding across its surface, the trees beginning to turn with the season. I'm not alone. I'm at peace. There's a difference. They left without another word. Later that evening, I took the last of the legal documents, confirmation of the house sale, the final transfer slips, the revocation of power of attorney, and placed them in a fireproof box. Then I opened the envelope Miriam had sealed 20 years ago when we first wrote our wills. Inside was a note in her handwriting, faded but still elegant. If you're reading this alone, it said, remember that love does not expire. It simply changes form. Protect yourself, Harvey, but leave space for grace. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back up and placed it on my desk, beside the new will I had drafted that morning, one that left everything to the library, the local hospice, and a scholarship fund in Miriam's name. For the first time in years, I felt something like freedom. Time has a way of smoothing even the sharpest corners, but it never quite erases the cuts. Months passed. The house was sold, the proceeds divided by the letter of the law, and for the first time in my adult life, I no longer held a physical place in the world that tethered me to Marcy and Carter. What remained were only the echoes of memory, and a few boxes I chose not to unpack. My new apartment was smaller, simpler, but every item inside had purpose. No clutter, no photographs unless I truly wanted to see them. I kept one picture of Miriam on the bookshelf, taken in our backyard the summer we built the birdhouse together. She's laughing in it, caught mid-moment, her eyes half shut in joy. That photo became a kind of lighthouse, a reminder that joy had once lived here, that it had once been enough. I spent my mornings walking the trails near the Veterans Center and my afternoons volunteering in the local library. They let me read history books to children on Thursdays. I became known, affectionately, as Mr. Harvey, the man who knows everything. One boy, maybe 9 or 10, once asked me if I had ever been famous. I told him no, but that I used to matter to someone. He nodded and said, "That still counts." And in that moment it did. These children didn't care about inheritance or houses or legacy. They cared that I showed up, that I spoke kindly, that I remembered their names. They gave me more honest affection than my own flesh and blood had offered in years. Marcy sent one letter, short and careful, with no return address. She said she hoped I was well, that Carter had found work, that they were adjusting. She didn't mention the court, or the money, or the betrayal. She wrote that she missed the way things used to be, and that maybe in time we could talk again. I didn't reply. I didn't destroy the letter either. I folded it and placed it beside Miriam's note in the drawer. Not out of hope, but out of record. There are some things worth preserving, not because they deserve resurrection, but because they serve as evidence of the arc a life can take. Carter never wrote. I didn't expect him to. But one day, while leaving the library, I saw someone had slipped a note into my mailbox there. It was written in all lowercase on torn notebook paper. It read, "I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were worth. No name, no signature, but I knew." I read it once, didn't take it home, didn't keep it. Some apologies are meant to stay light, to be carried only as long as they need to. One quiet Sunday, I returned to the old neighborhood, not to visit, but to say goodbye to the street that had once held the architecture of my entire adult life. The new owners had painted the shutters blue, planted a Japanese maple where Miriam's roses used to grow. I didn't knock. I simply stood across the street for a while, remembering the sound of her laughter echoing from the kitchen window, the thump of Carter's toy sword against the porch rails, the feel of the morning breeze against my face when I used to read the paper before the world turned. And then I turned away and walked back to my car, not with sadness, but with finality. In the end, I chose to live not as a man betrayed, but as a man reclaimed. My story didn't end in bitterness, though it passed through it. It didn't end in rage, though rage had built its foundation. It ended with me sitting in a room filled with books, surrounded by strangers who knew me only for what I offered in the present, not what they thought I owed them from the past. It ended with my own name, not theirs, with my own breath, not their silence, with dignity intact and peace, at last, earned. And that, I believe, is what justice sometimes looks like. Not revenge, not reconciliation, but quiet self-possession in the face of all that tried to diminish you. I was not just a babysitter. I was a man who remembered everything,